Hello and welcome back to the Legal Cheek podcast. I'm joined by our editor, Tom Connelly. Last week, we were with Ryan talking all things SQE and talking all things pathways into law. But now the big news that's hit our headlines is law firm financials. US heavyweight Kirkland and Ellis posted their financial results last week, and they've become the first law firm in history to break through the 10 billion revenue mark, which is absolute insanity. And their profit per equity has been equally staggering, covering off the 8 million a pound mark for each of the partners. Now, we're here to talk to you a little bit about what this means, what profit per equity actually, what it functions like on the day to day, and why sometimes just the figures can be a little bit deceiving. So, Tom, for those of us who, well, not for those of us, but for those who aren't necessarily aware of how it works, could you explain a little bit about what profit per equity partnership is, and the role it plays within law firms?
Absolutely, Julia. So you may see when some firms refer to their full name, they'll have LLP at the end of them, which essentially means limited liability partnership. So basically, as the title of your partner suggests, you are a partner at that law firm, and therefore you own effectively a slice of it, not too dissimilar to being a shareholder in that particular business. And therefore, if it makes a heavy profit, you take a good chunk of that. But also, the negative, if a firm happens to make a loss, you may be asked to cough up some of your own money to cover that loss. But obviously, most firms or most successful firms operate at a profit. And in Kirkland Ellis's case, a fairly substantial one. So, as you alluded to in that intro, the news broke this week that they breached or broke through the 10 billion dollar revenue barrier for the first time, which, as you say, is a staggering sum of money. And we ran a story on this. It showed that I think the PEP figure is as a pound conversion equated to 8.2 million, which is a hefty jump. I think a 20% jump on what they recorded last year. And we'll go into a little bit more detail about that. I digress slightly, but PEP is effectively is an abbreviation used for profit per equity partner. So that is the average that a partner at a particular firm is earning. And as again you alluded to in your introduction, partners can earn a lot more than that. They can also earn a lot less. And some actually don't earn any equity at all in the firm. Some of them actually prefer a bit more of a gentle pace of life. They're quite content saying, I'm going to be earning this set salary each year, plus potentially a performance related bonus. It all depends how their employment contract's been drafted. But they don't want the pressure that comes with being an equity partner. And what are those pressures? Well, the main one is almost certainly you almost become a salesperson for that business as well. And depending on which department you're in, you're responsible for kind of bringing in new business to that department because ultimately your income depends on it. If you're less profitable, obviously your earnings will come down. But also some firms will tie that performance into whether you're a partner at all. So Kirkland and Ellis, although they'll publicly say they've shifted away from this model in recent years, but some firms still adopt it, and you'll hear the phrase "eat what you kill," which sounds very tribal in nature. But what that essentially means is that you basically earn what you bring into the company, and if you're not bringing anything into that company, in this case a law firm, you'll be politely shown the door. So okay, yes, you're earning staggering sums of money potentially at some of these firms, but a lot of it comes with serious high pressure as well. It's not like they're passing on the work to associates and trainees. They'll be equally working long hours too, but they're very well remunerated for those hours as well, as you can see from Kirkland Ellis as an illustration. But more on Kirkland Ellis, Julia. So obviously
Yeah,
we ran a story on that earlier. Was it last week now? Yeah,
I
last
think it
week.
was, yeah.
For for those people that are like, what is this? What's happened at Kirkland Ellis? Maybe you could just give us a brief overview of what we reported on.
Yeah, absolutely. So we essentially reported on, as Tom was saying earlier, how much revenue they brought in, and then equally the profit per equity partnership. So their revenue increased, I think it was it was to 10 billion dollars, which is around 7.9 billion pounds, which was up from 6.6 billion pounds or 8.8 billion dollars the year before. I can't do the percentage increase myself. I'm not in very good at maths. And then the PEP, as Tom said, there was a 20% jump, and this is for the equity partnership. So for those, just to put those earnings into perspective a little bit, because I think we see these huge numbers and we're a bit overwhelmed by them because we don't quite know what that means in practice. If you take 8.2 billion million pounds a year, so the PEP for these lawyers, that's around 110,000 pounds a week, which is around 22,000, maybe a bit more pounds a day. The average salary in the UK is between sort of 31 to 39,000 pounds a year, depending on whether or not you're looking at a mean or a median. So like a normal person earns that much in a year, and then a Kirkland partner will make your entire yearly salary in 2 days. Even if you look at extremely highly paid industries, like the typical one that we always think of at Legal Cheek is like a Premier League football player, because you're always hearing about their earnings in the news. The average Premier League football player earns £80,000 a week. So a Kirkland partner, he tops even that. I think, I don't know, the top Premier League player currently is Erling Haaland. He's on £500,000 a week. So he blows the average Kirkland lawyer out the water, but still, as Tom was saying, you can imagine that there are a few rainmakers who are earning that much, which is staggeringly ridiculous. And on the firm's most list that we have on Legal Cheek, you can see how much further ahead Kirkland are than, the other city elites. So, US headquartered law firms who operate at a very high level of profitability as well. And how much further they are than Magic Circle firms, where they tend to have a PEP of around 2 million. And Kirkland's with their A, it's almost that's four times, more than four times what they're earning. I think the next firm, if correct me if I'm wrong, is like Davis Polk, who are at 6 million. So they're 2 million ahead of their closest competitor, which I don't know, Tom, that sounds pretty insane to me.
Yeah, so obviously these are staggering sums. I guess we should probably just point out that these are gross figures,
Oh
and
yeah, of course.
I don't mean that that's just it's an obscene amount of money. I mean literally they're gross in the sense that they've got to pay tax. There's tax implications on those, but it doesn't get away from the fact that they're staggering sums. We should also probably point out that if you go to Legal Cheeks firm's most list, and if you select by criteria and most money partners, you can see these PEP figures illustrated in a list that goes from highest to lowest. But one of the key things to just bear with these is this is a live list that we just update these figures as and when we receive them. And obviously, Kirkland and Ellis, historically with US firms, just to provide some context, they usually post their financial results towards the very start of the year, whereas UK headquartered firms typically wait till kind of the summer. So they're just around the corner. But Kirkland Ellis has gone very early. Um, Staggering 20% uplift to £8.2 million. The likes of Davis Polk, Paul Weiss, and those other firms at the very top, they're yet to disclose what their latest PEP figures are. So they could well bridge that gap. But we just don't know at this stage. It would just be pure speculation. Interestingly, I think it was the Financial Times that originally had the Kirkland Ellis story, and they pointed out that despite economic headwinds and a slowdown in equity, Kirkland Ellis seemed to have just completely gone against the grain and still posted massive profits.
Mm.
Whether the other firms will have as much success as that, because we know Kirkland Ellis, that is really, they're the go-to firm for private equity. They're known for it. That's their specialism. They've secured, as the FT piece referenced, some huge mandates over the last 12 or so months. So that will have really boosted the coffers at Kirkland Ellis. Whether the other firms will have had as much success, only time will tell. Keep sticking to Legal Cheap. We'll try and cover these in as much detail as we can. But yeah, there's just no getting away from that. That is is a staggering sum of money. Perhaps if we look ahead, I'm just thinking, what else should we? Obviously, I think we touched upon, but the non-equity tier.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, it's sort of self-explanatory in the sense that those are effectively salaried partners, like I mentioned at the start. They've not got skin in the game in the sense that they don't get a slice of the profits, but in the sense they don't get a lot of the pressures that come with being an equity partner. You've got a lot of the responsibilities of a normal partner, but there is a certain cut-off point there, and your income is reflected in that. It could be for personal reasons. Some people like maybe prefer a bit more work-life balance that comes with potentially a non-equity partnership position. It really is up to the individual. But we're seeing a lot of firms introducing kind of almost the step into a non-equity before they elevate a partner to an equity level partner, almost like as a mini promotion, as it were,
yeah,
from say kind of a senior associate level. And again, there could be a number of reasons for that. The one that jumps out to me the most would potentially be just trying to hold on to that particular individual. They might be a very strong asset to the business, but they're not quite at equity level or standard yet, and they don't want to lose that particular individual to another firm. So they're thinking, right, we'll stick this person on a non-equity tier for at least a few years before then we elevate them up. Potentially there'll be something in that individual's contract that says you'll be doing this for a couple of years, then you would be moving up to equity and you would soon see your income jump quite considerably. So I think a lot of firms are adopting that as an approach just to stop losing talent to other to other firms.
yeah,
Others are just recognizing they want to kind of create a partnership level, but for those that are not interested in equity, as I say, for work-life balance, maybe a lot of women are returning to work. They may have taken maternity leave or raising families as an associate. They're coming back to the firm. They don't want to go straight in as an equity partner, which obviously the hours soon ramp up. Non-equity might be a nice way to ease that individual back into the business. So there's many, many reasons, and it usually boils down to the individual why they would want to particularly be a non-equity partner. Uh, so we've obviously explained that. What else could we talk about? I'm just having a look at some of our questions that we've kind of pre-prepped. So we've said what are the reasons for establishing a non-equity tier, the pros and cons. So we've covered that. Um, the background of Kirkland, why are they so profitable? That is a really good question that we've sort of touched upon, but maybe Julia, without going into too much of the kind of the weeds on this,
yeah,
give
sure.
us a brief overview of why they're considered like the powerhouse of the city.
I think it's a good question. I think there are loads of reasons, but the ones that stand out to me, there are sort of two. Well, Tom's just been talking about the non-equity tier, and I think this is a big reason for Kirkland being able to bring in lots and lots of deals, but not dilute their profit too much. Obviously, that's got little to do with the revenue itself, but since we were just talking about it, in terms of figures, if you want to know, in 2025, Kirkland increased its equity partner ranks by 4%, but its overall partner count increased by 9. So actually 9%. So the majority of its partners, which is around 1,823, according to some figures released by AmLaw, that's the total number, and then there's only sort of 595 actual equity partners. So you can really tell that they have this huge partnership that is, bringing in business, and these people are, they don't have as much responsibility as Thomas said for bringing in deals and doing that business development side of things, but they're certainly still responsible for it more so than an associate would be. So they have this huge, pool of people that are able to bring in work. And that's really manifested itself. They have a huge share of the market when it comes to M&A deals. I think they were the top ranked legal advisor in terms of just how much work they did last year. It was like $800 billion worth of M&A deals. So also more than that, they focus on really, really high growth and highly profitable areas. They are the go-to people for private equity. And because private equity has exploded over the last 2 decades, they have focused almost all of their attention really on that area. That's not to say that they don't grow. They haven't, focused their expertise onto other areas. I mean, they're very good in litigation in the US specifically, but they've recognized where the money is and they've just put all their eggs into that basket, or a large number of them. So I think, yeah, and they're known for being quite tough. Their lawyers are known for working long hours. They're known for being really tough in negotiations. I think the FT reported that at some point last year and we picked it up. Um, so I think there are a number of reasons, and sometimes it is just luck. Sometimes you just have really good people that bring in a lot of work and are just these huge rainmakers. Law firms are obviously partnerships, but if you snatch that talent that is just able to bring in insane mandates, then you got to hang on to them. So when they leave, it's particularly stressful. So I think, yeah, talent retention is probably also another reason. But yeah, I'm never quite sure of all the exact reasons because it always feels a bit like a magic box that you can't really quite figure out. I'm not a business person yet. I don't know, Tom. What do you think?
Yeah, well, maybe just stepping away from Kirkland and Ellis itself and just looking more broadly at US firms operating in the city. You may have heard the kind of the phrase that US firms operate leaner models. So, for example, in their teams, as you can see, just looking at kind of again on the legal cheat firms most list, US firms offices in the city are by scale a lot smaller than, say, the office of a Magic Circle law firm. They take on fewer trainees, they have fewer lawyers, they might have fewer teams, and they usually operate quite leanly. So if you were a trainee, say for example, in a Magic Circle law firm, you might be working potentially with two or three other trainees in that team, possibly more. You will obviously have quite a few associates above you, then senior associates, then potentially a couple of partners in one team, potentially even more. Whereas if you're operating the same position in a US firm and you're a trainee there, particularly at one of the US firms with a very small city office, it may be you working directly under a partner. Um, you may also have little to no secretarial support or paralegal support, whereas you would probably get that in abundance at a Magic Circle law firm. So they're very much leveraged to be kind of very lean and then as a result, very highly profitable teams because they're not paying 40 to 50 salaries for that particular piece of work. They're paying 2 to 3. So you can see how that would just as a kind of just as a model charging at the same rates, if not more, than a Magic Circle law firm, how that would just generate a really highly profitable machine compared to, say, a Magic Circle firm that is a profitable machine, but just not as much as a US law firm in London. Obviously, that the knock-on effect of that is kind of just your costs for operating in the city. If you I know Legal Cheek's publisher Alex recently visited the new office of Linklaters, and I think the phrase that he described it was, it was just like a metropolis city. It was just insane. This place, it's absolutely vast. They've got the whole building to themselves, so this is a huge new tower block, but they've got the whole thing to themselves. So I couldn't even fathom how many square feet that is and how many lawyers are operating in that building. But obviously, this building is very, very expensive, and it's obviously a massive cost to that firm. They've obviously weighed it up and thought, on balance, it's worth doing that. And Linklaters is a very profitable law firm. But if you compared that to, say, the offices of a US firm in London, while I'm sure they're equally as plush and fancy, they'll be nowhere near the same scale and size. So again, that is an overhead that the US have reduced massively. So again, this all feeds into cost savings that ultimately um, boosts profits. So that's another example. And then when you kind of factor that into the kind of, as you mentioned with Kirkland Ellis, the highly valuable work that these firms are working on, you can see why the US firms are sort of leading the way when it comes to profits. Now, some people might sit there and argue, well, if you go to a US law firm, you're going to be working as a result longer hours. Obviously, NQ and trainee salaries are higher than the Magic Circle at these US firms. You're just going to be working harder for that extra money. But if you look at the kind of the breakdown of the start and leave times, and these are average start and leave times on Legal Cheeks firms mostly. So obviously we don't have the kind of the partner start and leave times, but we do have the trainee and junior lawyer ones, and they actually show that the differences are negligible between the elite US law firms and the elite UK headquartered firms. So really, I know we're digressing slightly off the kind of the PEP topic, but it's a point that's worth flagging. If you're going to be working in these elite firms and your ultimate goal is to become a partner and earn insane levels of money, as we've talked about already, you're going to be working hard regardless.
Yeah.
Whether you're finishing it, whether you're finishing at 9:30 or 10:30 at night, probably won't make that much difference to your personal life. And again, that all feeds back into why some lawyers aren't for that equity life, so to speak, and they would much prefer a bit more work-life balance with a kind of a regular income salaried without the sort of all the trappings and pressures that come with being an equity partner. So it isn't for everybody. And this was a point I was meant to make towards the start of the podcast, but I completely forgot. It's sort of easy to get sucked into the world of PEP and looking at, but the thing that some often gets overlooked is this is an average. And I know you talked about the kind of the rainmakers at the firm. Yes, if we look at Kirkland Ellis as an incredibly extreme example at 8.2 million, that is an average. Will there be lawyers earning more than that? Yes, a lot more, potentially 2 or 3 times that. I'm sure someone will comment now saying that I'm way off on that. There could be 4 or 5 times that, but there will be. But then there'll be a hell of a lot of partners there that are not earning anywhere near that 8.2 million. And there was a really good illustration of this and how the average can actually be skewed slightly. Um, Recently, we reported back in February of a UK headquartered firm which is on the cusp of a merger itself with a US firm. So that'll be interesting dynamic between the two sets of partners. But we've got Taylor Wessing, who's on the cusp of merging with a US firm called Winston and Strawn, and they published their figures through Companies House, and it was noted in those figures that the top lawyer, who's obviously a partner at the firm, earned £10,387,583 for the financial year earning the 30th of April 2025. So that is actually above the average at Kirkland, but that is the top partner at Taylor Wessing. But the important thing to note is that the average PEP at Taylor Wessing for that same period is 1.1 million. So that just shows you that the very top partner at that particular firm is earning, give or take some pounds and pence, 10 times what some of the partners are earning there. But that also shows that will have obviously skewed the PEP. If you've got one partner at the very top earning 10 million, you'll have a lot of partners that are sitting well below that 1.1 million, taking I mean, I'm saying hundreds of thousands like it's a bad thing, but it's still a very reasonable income to be making in the city. But it does show you how these things do get skewed and why when you look at a PEP figure, whether that's a motivation for wanting to get a training contract at a particular firm, I don't know. Maybe you're getting a little bit ahead of yourself if you're looking at the PEP figure when applying for training contracts. But you've got to look at that figure within the context. That's really, really important. And saying, yes, that is the average. There'll be partners in less profitable sections of that business that are not earning anywhere near that. And then, as you pointed out, Julia, there'll be rainmakers at the very, very top of that firm that will be pulling in astronomical sums in comparison to that, 10 times in this particular person's case. And they never named the partner, but you could probably have a little search around on Taylor Wessing's website and maybe have a good clue to who that individual might be. But yeah, I think that's just worth bearing in mind when students are looking at these figures and can get lost in them a little bit. I know one of the next questions to look at as we kind of come towards the end of this podcast is kind of how is the market looking in the city? As I say, the UK firms haven't announced their latest financials. In reality, are they going to be coming even close to Kirkland? No.
No,
And
I doubt it.
I'm speaking for UK, yeah, speaking for UK headquartered firms where I know, let's use the magic circle as just as an illustration because that's kind of the firms that students instantly recognize when we're looking at UK headquartered firms. But their PEP has remained relatively level over the last of the ones that disclose it have remained relatively level over the last few years. With for various reasons, kind of market headwinds, uncertainty, whatever excuses they usually roll out during these. But the turnover has increased at most of these firms at the same time, so it's just profitability that's kind of fallen flat slightly, perhaps due to rising costs. One of the things that jumps out to me as a rising cost, certainly over the last few years, is trainee and NQ salaries. We've
Yeah.
certainly seen them at UK headquarters jump up as they try to sort of keep pace, albeit struggle to keep pace with the US firms, who I think at the top of the market, you could be an NQ at, and earning kind of close to 180,000, whereas the NQ salaries at the Magic Circle and the leading UK headquartered firms are sitting at around 150. So they're struggling to kind of bridge that gap, and some firms are losing talent to these US firms that have small trainee cohorts. So on qualification, an NQ is looking at the market and thinking, well, and this is kind of a very simplistic overview, but they're looking at the market and thinking, well, I'm going to be working long hours at both these firms. Should I earn 150 grand or 180,000? And some are making the decision to go to the US firms for
Yeah.
various reasons. So yeah, it's a tough market, but we won't know fully what is happening in it until these figures come out, which stay tuned will hopefully be over the next few months. Um, I guess as a final thing, and I've sort of alluded to it there as an outlook to the future, are more firms kind of going to try and follow Kirkland's model?
Mm. It's hard to tell because I think many of them are trying, or in terms of the UK based firms and US headquartered firms. I think I've seen almost in lots of financial results from last year and from the ones that we've already seen coming out this year, loads of them have, put more attention towards private capital heavy practices, which is where the money is right now. A lot of them have introduced non-equity tiers. But as you say, it's kind of hard to change your entire model and culture in the span of a few years just to chase something that another firm is trying to do. So I don't think Clifford Chance is suddenly going to become Kirkland Ellis because you can't really do that overnight. Um, but as we've seen with NQ pay, with trainee pay, um, with lots of early careers teams constantly talking about how you get lots of responsibility at their firm because they want to advertise that very US independent, lean style of training, even if that's not really the case. They tend to say it anyway, which I always find quite curious. If you're in a cohort of 90 trainees, then you're not going to be very independent because you're probably going to be in a team of a few with lots of people over you. But despite that, there's been this emphasis on it anyway, which I find interesting, and I think that's a US influence, particularly maybe a Kirkland influence. It's hard to tell. What I find curious is that McFarlane's is actually currently the highest firm, UK headquartered firm on the PEP list, I think, if I'm correct, on our list anyway. Um,
Hmm.
which I think is mostly because of their focus on private capital. But broadly speaking, I do think the US model is going to keep chipping away at UK headquarters firms' resolve at the very least. But I don't know if it's the wisest thing for them to keep trying to catch up with them in the way that Kirkland are doing it because they're just simply not set up for that culture and way of doing things. Because, working at Kirkland is probably quite different vibes wise, for lack of a better word, than working at, I don't know, Slaughter and May.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. And I mean, off the back of this, we're seeing UK headquartered firms, and particularly the Magic Circle, trying to make inroads into the US market.
Yeah.
Opening more and more offices over there, UK headquarter firms merging with US firms as well. So there's definitely a blend happening there. And whether if we were doing this podcast in 10 years' time, whether there'll be such thing as a kind of a typical UK headquartered law firm, or whether they'll have all merged and looked like something very similar to each other.
Yeah.
Who knows? Who knows? But yeah, really interesting times ahead. And perhaps there's a podcast in a few months' time where we look at once the UK headquarter firms or the most of them have released their financials, we can have a better idea of where we're at. But I like I say, that's probably for another time.
Yeah.
So I guess that concludes this podcast. Well, firstly, thank you very much for tuning in. If you have reached the end, we do publish these as a story each Monday, sort of as it's working. If you've got any ideas you want us to talk about, maybe pop those in the comments as well. That'd be really, really helpful because we're going to continue this throughout the summer and into autumn. So we're always keen to know what you would like us to talk about rather than the other way around, just talking to you about various things. So do let us know about that. But until next time, Julia, thank you very much for
Yeah.
joining me this morning or this afternoon or whenever you're listening to this. And I'll see you on another podcast in the near future.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom. Bye, everyone. Have a lovely rest of the week.